Using the text comparison tool in Logos Bible Software 5. I used to manage a seminary bookstore, and so often people would ask me this very question. Well, all of these Bibles you've told me about, but which one's the best? I was often dumbfounded as to what to actually answer them, and oftentimes what is the best would be dependent upon which tradition they found themselves coming out of. If they used NIV all their life, perhaps that was the best. If they were a solid KJV only advocate, perhaps KJV was the best. But what I'd like to advocate is something a little bit different. Not necessarily hearkening upon which particular translation is the best, but what each particular translation can offer us. Logos Bible software actually offers us a very helpful array of tools that will allow us to compare different translations to be able to glean the strengths of each that they offer, as well as to ignore their weaknesses. So let's take a look at some different features that we have within Logos Bible software that will help us to do a translation comparison of the different English texts while still being able to use our original language text. In particular, we're going to be focusing upon the Greek New Testament and the English translations of that. So I'm going to start off first by opening up our Greek New Testament. In this particular case, I'm going to be using the Neso Alon 28th edition, or the NA28, as many people have come to know it. This is the most recent critical text of the Greek New Testament that we have today. The English text that I want to compare this against, first off, is going to be the ESV, or the English Standard Version. And I also want to take a look at the NIV, or New International Version. And last but not least, I want to take a look at the KJV. These are some of the more popular English translations that we have available today, and many traditions within the church will swear by each of these. Now, I'm not an advocate to say that one of these is better than the other in any particular fashion. I think each has their own strengths and each has their own weaknesses. But how can we actually compare these in a reasonable and quick manner while still not taking away from the task of actually reading the text? Well, the way that many people would prefer to do comparisons of different translations would be to simply line these up into different columns. As we can see right now, we have different tabs of these resources because Logos wants to be minimalistic as much as possible as a default. So if we want to change from this tabbed version, we're going to have to do that ourselves, because these tabs are not very conducive to textual comparison. As you can see, when one is visible and others are hidden, that's not going to help us. So what we can do is actually click and drag a particular tab into a particular space, and Logos will resize it for us as we drag and drop. And we're going to do the exact same thing on this other side with the King James Version, drag and drop it into a separate column. So now we have 4 columns with 4 different types of text. We have the original language text on the far left, followed by the NIV, the ESV, and the King James Version. Right now they're all on 1 John chapter 5 verse 6. But as we can see, if we go to our NA28 and begin to scroll down, the other Bibles are not following. This is somewhat problematic. I don't want to have to go through and scroll every single Bible one by one in order to do a proper textual comparison. Luckily, Logos has provided us a solution to this issue. What we can do is create a custom link set where we can link each resource panel to the other. In order to set up a link set, that option is available in the top left-hand corner of each resource panel. This is the information panel for the resource. Simply click that panel and you'll find here a option called link set. So what we want to do is set this first link set to link set A. Now, any resource that we put into link set A will scroll along with any other resource in link set A. So we'll set the NIV to link set A as well, and the ESV to link set A. Now, as you can see, when we scroll along in our NA28 to verse 11 and verse 12, the NIV and the ESV are scrolling along with it. And look at that, King James, not in the link set A, did not scroll along with them. But we want King James to be a part of this as well, so we're going to go ahead and give that link set A also. So now all of our resources are in tandem across the board and are scrolling together. But as you can see, there's one other issue that we still need to resolve. And that particular issue is this does not look very elegant whatsoever. I'm on verse 6 in the NA28, but verse 6 is all over the place in the others. Not to mention that the different verses are pretty hard to distinguish from one another, and this does not really offer itself to be a very conducive environment for textual translation comparison. So how can we solve this issue? Well, luckily Logos has also thought about this as well. As you see on your resource panel here at the top next to the search bar is an option with 3 circles. This is the visual filters option. You can turn on and off visual filters, and what visual filters are things that you can see on the text, such as footnotes and verse numbers and heading titles and even your own personal notes and highlights. Well, we can turn those on and off, and in this particular instance the option we want to have selected is Bible text only. If we select Bible text only, what that's going to do is give us just the biblical text, and it's going to separate it out by verses. This is going to be very, very helpful when doing comparison between different translations. However, we just changed the NA28 to Bible text only, and the others are still the way they were before. So we can go to our NIV and select Bible text only, and we can do that with pretty much all of our resources, but luckily, once again, we have a shortcut. Rather than going to each one and selecting Bible text only, we can right-click on the words Bible text only to get a pop-up. This pop-up shows us 2 options: show in all appropriate resources and do not show in any resources. The particular option that we're interested in is show in all appropriate resources. This will change all of our Bibles or versified books to just to show the Bible text only. So we're going to go ahead and not pick that option, and just like that, the ESV and the KJV turn into Bible text only, versified format, and look at that. Not only now do we have 4 columns, but we have 4 columns that scroll together, and not only do they scroll together, but they're nice and unified and clean looking with the same verse at the top. This will provide a very conducive option to comparing the different translations. Now there's one other aspect to this that could be very, very helpful for us, and that is, I'm not a Greek scholar. I don't know every Greek word off like the back of my hand. I need a little help from time to time. Well, Logos does have the option in the bottom left-hand corner. When you mouse over a Greek word, it will give you the parsing with the English gloss as well. Well, that's good and dandy, but you know what? Sometimes the different English translations will use different English words for the same Greek word. In this particular instance, pneuma is translated spirit across the board, so that's not an issue. But how am I to know that if I didn't have any Greek knowledge whatsoever? Sometimes Bible software packages will simply have an option where you can mouse over a word and it will highlight the others. However, Logos doesn't have that option, but it does have something very similar to that I think will be of extreme help to us, and I think goes even further than what some of these other packages offer. We're going to go back to the visual filters option, and we're going to select an option called sympathetic highlighting. What sympathetic highlighting does is anytime you highlight a piece of text in one, it will highlight that same text as it's tagged in the others. But if we learned anything from Bible text only, We're not just going to do this for each individual text. We're going to go ahead and right-click on it and select Show in All Appropriate Resources. So now, as we highlight pneuma, it will highlight that same word in all of our English texts as well. In this case, it's spirit. One of the more advanced options we have with this sympathetic highlighting option is that we can select more than one word. If we want this entire section of the Greek text, ta pneuma kai ta hudor, the spirit and the water, it will highlight all of those words in the English as well. In NIV, the spirit, the water, the spirit and the water, the spirit and the water in the King James. Very, very cool, very, very awesome. This creates an incredible opportunity for us to do textual comparison amongst the different translations of the Greek New Testament. Now, this is a traditional way to do translation comparison, but for my purposes, I actually want to simplify this even more. One of the ways that we can simplify this is through a tool that Logos has included in their tool set in the software package, and that particular tool is the text comparison tool. So I want to look at the purpose of the text comparison and why it may be helpful. Before I take a look at it, though, I want to mention why I would want to use text comparison as opposed to this method for translation comparison. As you can see, there's a lot of text on the screen right now. And in order for me to compare my 3 different English translations against one another, I have to read each one individually and then more than likely read them again and look at each of the differences and mark them down. It becomes a little bit tedious to do that kind of comparison. Luckily, there's an easier way that can make this a lot quicker and a lot more painless, and that is the text comparison tool. So if we want to get our text comparison open, we're going to go up to the Tools menu up top, and in the Passage section, there's the text comparison. And the tooltip says the text comparison tool shows the current passage in multiple versions and the differences between them. That's exactly what we want. So we're going to go ahead and select that. And what it does by default is pushes the text comparison window to the far right hand side. It will do that whether you have 10 options open or whether you have 0 resources open. We don't like it over there. We're going to want to put that in a different spot to make it a little bit more conducive to what we're doing. So we're going to go ahead and drag the text comparison tool down to the very bottom of our windows and drop it in there so it'll resize it nice and big for us so we can see everything nice and clear. And then last but not least, we're going to go ahead and resize that just a little bit so it doesn't take up so much of our screen real estate. Now we're really cooking with gas here. I want to illustrate a few things that the text comparison tool can do, so we're going to grow it just a little bit so you can see it just a little bit more clearly. One of the things that we can do in the text comparison tool is actually link this to our current setup. So we're going to set it to link set A. But as you can see here, not only does it list the different translations that we have, and you can set it up to do whatever set of translations you want. If you would rather have NASB on the end here, you can do that as well. And if we hit enter, it adds NASB there. But for our purposes, we don't want NASB because we're not working with it right now. So what's really cool about the text comparison tool is that not only does it show you just the text, well, okay, we've got that up top, that's not super helpful, but you can actually click on a little button here called the Show Differences button. So we're going to go ahead and click Show Differences. And what this does is it actually highlights any differences between our other translations with the base text. And in this particular tool, the base text is the first translation listed, which is the ESV. So it's going to show us any differences that exist between the NIV and the KJV with the English Standard Version. As we see in the NIV, it shows us that there is zero difference, so the same wording is used. However, in the King James Version, we have 64.7% difference. That's quite a bit of difference between those. So there must be something going on here. If we look down at the text itself, we can see in black the same words that are also listed in the NIV and the English Standard Version, but in the blue here are all different words. If we hover over this, it'll actually show us what the base text says in this place, which is just testify. So there's quite a bit of additional content here that the King James has added, or perhaps the NIV and English Standard Version have taken away from the biblical text. This is a big thing that we need to take a look further into. Now, for the purposes of this video, I'm not going to take a further look into that. I'm going to leave that up to you, the user. What I want to do is show you how these tools can help you to become aware of these different issues with regard to our English translations, especially when working with if you're not a stud in original languages like myself. So this is one of the reasons why the text comparison tool is incredibly helpful. It helps us to see these differences a lot quicker, a lot more clearly, and helps us to visualize them. If we wanted to go even further, we can actually show the base text in each of these versions. So we'll go ahead and click that, and what that does is it actually adds the base text version there. Instead of just mousing over, it will show us it within the text, which allows us to really visualize what's going on here. So here's an instance where the King James actually adds additional text to the biblical text, and there will be times where NIV will have some different wordings, ESV will have some different wordings, and we'll see the merit or deficiency of those texts, given the different verses. So there's one other option that I want to show you that you can use when doing translation comparison, and that is the information tool. The information tool is found in the tool option up here. So we're going to open that up, and it's in the lookup section. This is information. What information does is provide you a quick glance of helpful information that you can use for your Bible study and translation comparison. We're going to go ahead and put information down here in the bottom corner. So what information will do for us is actually allow us, when we mouse over a particular word, it will give us a quick gloss of that word. As you can see, some really helpful information translated. So when we look at the word marturantes, we can see it's translated as testify, that bear record, in all these different translations, how it's translated. We can also get a quick gloss of the word here. It's in different senses or meanings, and we can even get a pronunciation of the lemma. Martyreo, interesting. And then we have a definition of the word in our prioritized Greek lexicon. So the information panel is extremely helpful when we're looking at different texts, particularly in translation comparison, because as you'll see over here, if we mouse over the words of the King James that are not used in the ESV or NIV, and then look at the information panel, we'll see that the word "word" there, which was not in the ESV or NIV, says variant reading. What variant reading means is that in the original Greek manuscript that the ESV or NIV are based upon, these words do not exist. In fact, the King James Version and the New King James Version and the Authorized Version are all using a textual variant of the Greek manuscript tradition. One of the reasons why I love to compare King James against more modern translations like ESV and NIV is this textual tradition difference in the Greek New Testament. So it creates a good comparison against one another. So these are the reasons why the text comparison tool and the information panel are all very helpful tools, and this is a quick way that you can set up a translation comparison workspace. I want to take a moment to show you a few really cool practical applications when using the text comparison tool as well as this text comparison layout that I have saved here. And it's utilizing two resources that are in my library that come in many of the Logos 5 base packages. I believe anywhere from bronze and up will come with these resources. So, definitely take a look at them. As we use the sympathetic highlighting tool in our Greek New Testament, we can go to verse 7 in particular and we can highlight the whole verse. And this is something that I like to do when I'm looking at the different English translations to see if there's anything that's left out by one of the other translations or anything that's extra. As you can see, since we've highlighted the whole of verse 7, and this is one of the real selling points of the sympathetic highlighting option as opposed to just simply hovering over one individual word and being locked into that option, is you can see that in the English Standard Version and the NIV, the whole verse is also highlighted. There's nothing extra or extraneous. However, in the King James Version, we can see that there is quite a bit of extra text there that is not highlighted. So if we want to utilize the information panel, we can go and highlight over one of these words in the non-selected or non-highlighted text. And when we look down at the information panel, right down here, we can see that it says variant reading for the ESV, NIV, NAS, those other more modern English translations. And we actually see the word translated for the KJV, the New King James, as well as the Authorized Version. Those three particular English translations are all using the same Greek text. However, the ESV, the NIV, so on and so forth, are using a different Greek text, actually one that's in more accord with the Nestle Aland 28th edition or the more eclectic modern text. So that's why it says variant reading, because that original Greek manuscript or original Greek text that they're basing their English translations upon actually does not include that reading or those words in the Greek. So if I want to take a look at the Greek that lies behind the KJV tradition, there is a resource in our library that I want to open up. So I'm going to go ahead and open the library. And this is Scrivener's Greek New Testament. So you can just type in Scrivener, and it's the New Testament in Greek, Scrivener 1881. If you read the tooltip, you can see a little bit about what this is. I'll just read a few lines for you. It says, this Greek text is the Greek text which corresponds best to the 1611 King James Version. The Scrivener text is a modified Beza 1598 Textus Receptus in which changes have been made to reflect the readings chosen by the KJV translators. So this Greek text is actually built to follow along with the King James Version and the Greek behind the King James Version. So this will give us a pretty accurate original Greek text for the Textus Receptus. And one of the nice things about this particular text, as opposed to some of the other options for the Textus Receptus, like the Elsevier Textus Receptus, is that this Scrivener text actually has morphological tagging, which, as well as sympathetic highlighting capability and functionality. So it'll actually work much better in our Logos system here. So I'm going to go ahead and open this text up. And it should open right next to the NA28 that we already have open, and there it is right there. And so one of the cool things about this is anywhere that the text actually varies from the more eclectic text of the NA28, Westcott Hort, all those different textual traditions of the Greek New Testament, it actually bolds it in black. So if we highlight just the bolded black portion, as you can see, the ESV and NIV, who base their text on the eclectic modern text, don't have anything highlighted. However, the King James has that portion that was missing highlighted. So you can actually see why and what the Greek text behind the King James is. So that's a very cool feature that's made available to us through the sympathetic highlighting feature of Logos, as well as we were able to see that through our text comparison tool through a quick analysis breaking down the verse. We can see also in verse 8 following that there's also another of these sections that is included in the Greek text that the King James is based upon that is not included in the ESV or the NIV or the NAS. And as you can see when you mouse over this particular text in the information panel, it shows you that there is a variant reading going on here, which is once again incredibly helpful information. Now, you may be asking why does the ESV or NIV not include these texts when the King James does? This is a decision that's made by people called textual critics. They're ones that look at the different manuscripts of the Greek New Testament. We have well over 5,200 different Greek New Testament manuscripts that we will collate and look at in order to determine what the original reading was or what the original author was more than likely to have penned without any sort of emendation or amendments added to it. So one of the resources that many have in their libraries that is incredibly helpful in this conversation is something called a textual commentary on the Greek New Testament by Bruce Metzger. That's available in our library, so I'm just going to open my library and type Metzger. And it's right down here, a textual commentary on the Greek New Testament, second edition. What I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and open this resource up. It's going to pop up in one of my Bible windows up here, as you can see right here. I don't want it in that window. I'm actually going to drag it down so it shares a window with my information panel. Give me a little bit more reading room. And what we can see here in Metzger is he actually gives a full analysis of why one Greek New Testament was, one Greek version was chosen over another, or one Greek variant was chosen over another. He typically sides with the more eclectic modern text that is based upon a different textual transmission than the Textus Receptus that the King James is based upon. So he gives a full account of why he, as well as some of the other scholars, believe that these verses, or this part of the verse, was actually not part of the original core of Scripture. It was actually not penned by the authors originally. It was actually a later addition to the text. So I'd be happy to read through this a little bit, but I'll let you, the user, look through this for yourselves. But really, the major evidence comes from through the external evidence, that being that the passage is absent from every known Greek manuscript except 8, and these contain the passage in what appears to be a translation from a late recension of the Latin Vulgate, and then 4 of the 8 manuscripts that are known, that are all very late, we're talking earliest is 14th century, and we have manuscripts dating all the way back to the 2nd century. 4 of the 8 manuscripts contain the passage as a variant reading written in the margin as a later addition to the manuscript. So, you know, it's a very strong argument, and here he lists the actual manuscripts that you can mouse through and mouse over to find out what these actually mean. This is extremely helpful when looking at the manuscript evidence, the original Greek texts. So I like to keep this resource open as part of my text comparison layout. So once again, these are some really helpful and practical tips and tricks that you can use when looking at the different translations, when doing textual comparison, using both sympathetic highlighting as well as the text comparison tool. I would highly encourage you to copy this layout if you like what you see, and I'd be more than happy to answer any further questions in the comments if you have them. So have fun comparing the texts. I believe that the Lord will really reveal a lot of really interesting and great interpretive details by doing this. And I know I love to use this when I'm analyzing a text on the beginning of doing sermon prep as well as teaching any lessons. So hope you enjoyed this, and all the best.